So a very warm welcome to our current faculty and students, our retired faculty and alumni, and all of our guests from across campus and beyond. We actually have guests attending from all parts of the world today. One of the things that Zoom does make possible. This year, we're delighted to celebrate 50 years as a department. And the realization that we were approaching this milestone probably came in fall 2018 as we prepared the self-study for our department's external review. Needless to say, though, at that time, we never anticipated that we would be hosting any of our celebratory events virtually. But given the ongoing concerns of the pandemic and the associated restrictions with having face-to-face events and food service and all of those things on campus, we opted to host this first event virtually. But we do have events in the planning stages, face-to-face events for spring 2022. So we hope you will all stay tuned for those. And we do thank you for joining us despite any dread you have at this point for anything virtual and anything Zoom. Sorry to add one more Zoom event to your calendar. Before introducing our guest speaker, we thought it would be appropriate to commemorate a 50th anniversary by providing at least a brief overview and history of our department and how we came to be, but acknowledging that our audience also includes attendees from outside the department. We will keep this part short. As you've noticed, we do have a longer department name, probably one of the longer ones in Cal. It's Department of Linguistics and Asian/Middle Eastern Languages. We've been described as a complex and multifaceted unit, given that we teach and research in linguistics, 7 Asian or Middle Eastern languages that include Arabic, Chinese, Filipino, Hebrew, Japanese, Korean, and Persian. And we also house the university's English for Academic Purposes writing program. These all might sound like distinct units that could exist independently of the others, but there is a common thread that binds our faculty, our teaching, and our scholarship, and that's our training in linguistics. Unlike other departments where it may be common for languages to be taught by faculty trained in other disciplines, our language courses are taught by faculty trained in the scientific study of language, its structure, how it's represented in the mind-brain, how people use language in context, how people acquire language, and so forth. Likewise, our English for Academic Purposes writing program is directed by a trained linguist with expertise in language acquisition and literacy development. And this shared expertise we have in linguistics has allowed us to develop a number of high quality and popular programs on campus. We offer majors in linguistics, obviously. We also have a BA in a new major, Language, Culture, and Society, that we call LCS. And we have a long-standing MA program in linguistics with 2 specializations, General Linguistics and TESOL/Applied Linguistics. On the languages side, we have a major and minor in Japanese, a minor in Chinese, certificates in Arabic and Korean, and we offer the full gamut of courses in Filipino, Hebrew, and Persian that a undergraduate would want to take if they're fulfilling language requirements across campus. Of course, our languages aren't just there to fulfill language requirements. Our programs in Japanese, Chinese, Arabic, and Korean, for example, fulfill area studies interests in international business, for example. A student studying or majoring in the study of religion on campus may take courses in Hebrew or Arabic and so forth. Likewise, our EAP program is a composition program, English for Academic Purposes writing program, geared at non-native writers of English across campus, 5 different levels of study. These are aimed at students here in the US who maybe don't have English as a native language, but also our international student populations who need to excel at English language writing to do well here at SDSU. And over the years, we've been able to develop a number of certificates that really help students with career pathways. Teaching English as a second language, these are in the lower left-hand corner of your slide. Computational linguistics, text analytics, and so forth. So for those of you who know our department, but maybe haven't seen what we've been offering for a while, you'll probably note some things in here that weren't here even just a few years ago. So we're a big department. We have a lot of programs, but how did we get here? Well, we weren't originally an independent department on campus. We have our origins in the Department of English. So back in 1967, a group of faculty formed a linguistics committee and set up a program of courses and a minor. 2 years later, this group received permission to offer the MA in linguistics. And shortly after that, the English department on campus was subdivided into different units, and linguistics was one of those units. So we consider 1972 to be our birth year and the year we became an independent department on campus. But we grew up quickly. 2 years later, we were already offering the BA in linguistics. Shortly after that, in 1979, we offered our first section of an ESL composition course, which is now part of this English for Academic Purposes writing program. And this was at the request of the English department, who wanted us to provide courses to help non-native speakers of English with their academic writing on campus. Of course, now that is a big program with over 1,000 students enrolled every year. Now, we didn't have languages in our department until about 10 years later. In 1989, we acquired the programs, excuse me, in Chinese, Japanese, and Hebrew, which moved over from the Department of Classics. Of course, at this time, we were just the Department of Linguistics. So this resulted in a name change. In 1990, we became the Department of Linguistics and Oriental Languages. Fast forward 10 years, we're in a new century, a new millennium, and we kind of went on a language program creation binge, I guess, if you want to call it, for lack of a better word. In 8 years, we created 5 new programs in Arabic, Persian, Filipino, Vietnamese, and Korean. Regrettably, during the financial crisis in 2008, 9, and so forth, our Vietnamese program was cut. Hopefully at a future time, we could add that back. But the 4 other programs remain strong and are very strong programs on campus. This, of course, resulted in a name change because not all of these programs fit under the rubric of our previous department name. So in 2006, we became the Department of Linguistics and Asian/Middle Eastern Languages. I believe at the time, if I remember, the story was we actually wanted to be the Department of Linguistics and Asian Languages and Middle Eastern Languages. And somewhere up the chain, I don't know if it was at the CSU level or whatever, they decided we couldn't have 2 ands in our department name. So we got a slash instead. One of those quirky things that happens. More recently, we added a new BA in Language, Culture, and Society. This is a joint effort with the Department of Anthropology. So we're kind of entwined across campus in curriculum development with many departments. And this academic year, 2021-22, we turned 50. So it's our golden anniversary, but we're not ready to rest on our laurels yet. We're looking ahead to the future with some ideas that are under development, such as a university-wide center for bilingualism studies, a center and possibly a PhD in natural language processing, as well as developing a minor in Arabic and other programs. The event that we had planned for today, given that we're kind of a multifaceted unit, was to focus on our language programs, because within the language programs, there are kind of anniversaries embedded within the larger 50th anniversary. And you'll see that soon as we talk about some of the programs. So the flyer that you received was titled 50 Years of Excellence in Language Learning and Teaching. And the collocation you're probably used to hearing is teaching and learning, not necessarily learning and teaching. But we kind of flipped this around because in our department, we acquired our programs in languages, a second or non-native languages other than English, later in our development in 1989, as we mentioned before, and developed many in the after 2000. But our department always had an interest in language learning and language learners. So the year that we formed in 1972 was also the year that we added to our curriculum the course called Theory and Practice of Teaching English as a Second Language. Ling 550 is what our students know it by. And we've always had faculty in the department interested in language acquisition and language learning. So with that, we wanted to quickly acknowledge the accomplishments of language programs in our department before segueing to our guest speaker. Our program in Chinese was founded in 1968. And you see our faculty there, our tenured faculty, Zhang and Regina. Zhang is right now in China conducting research on a faculty Fulbright. And we also have a wonderful lecturer in Rand Dalton who is a graduate of our MA program in applied linguistics and teaches Chinese courses for us. Shortly after moving to linguistics, the Chinese program established a minor and later on a track for heritage language speakers. So we're talking about bilinguals who grew up speaking Chinese at home, but maybe didn't completely acquire it, maybe don't have literacy skills in Chinese, and the instruction they need is different. This fall, there are almost 100 students across our Chinese curriculum taking Chinese courses. Our Japanese program was established in 1966, directed by Professor Yoshiko Higurashi, and our other tenured faculty, Ryuki Tajima and Yuki Arita, played strong advisory roles in the program. This program established a minor before moving to linguistics, 1986, and established a major in 1996. And I was kind of doing the math on this the other day and realized that 2021 would be a 25th anniversary of this major. So an anniversary within the larger anniversary. And this fall, there are almost 350 students enrolled across the Japanese curriculum. And many of these courses are taught by our fabulous trio of lecturers, Asuka Kuratani, Rina Pasamanik, and Momoko Arasaki, all of whom are graduates of our MA programs in linguistics and applied linguistics. And of course, the faculty have been instrumental in curriculum development, developing textbooks, and so forth. Our program in Hebrew, which was one of our 3 programs, moved from the classics. We didn't have an exact date on this. We've been digging around and we didn't quite get it, but we know it's in the 1960s, probably the late 1960s, but we didn't want to guess and be wrong. So we put an X there. But a primary developer of this program is Professor Emeritus Zev Barlev, who's widely known for his research on sheltered initiation language learning, has published many materials and textbooks on Hebrew, teaching of Hebrew that are used at SDSU, UCSD, and beyond. The majority of the courses now, or actually all of the courses now, are taught by our fabulous lecturer, Alana Schuster, who's also the advisor for the Hebrew language program. Our program in Persian, more recently added, is taught by another fabulous lecturer, Puna Pedar, who's also the advisor for the program. And this fall, we have almost 24 students taking courses in Persian. And our program in Filipino, also very popular on campus, is the curriculum is taught by Atilio Alicio, who's a very beloved professor on campus. His courses always have a wait list. This fall, we've got, again, 77, almost 80 students taking Filipino courses. And this program was founded also more recently in 2014. Our program in Korean was founded by in 2008 by Professor Emerita Sunja Che. She more recently retired and took a job as a researcher at the University of Vienna in Austria. And the time change there didn't allow her to attend. I think it's 3:30 in the morning there. But she's had is heavily involved in the Korean program still, despite being retired from SDSU. She's helped us develop a certificate in Korean studies. There are close to 100 students taking Korean courses this fall, and the program is advised right now by In-Suk Kong, and we have this trio of 3 excellent lecturers who teach the courses for us now, including Kyung Chun and Hyuni Park. Oops, my apologies, I skipped ahead. Last but not least, our program in Arabic was founded in a key year for the United States and the world, 2001. It was founded by Professor Ghada Osman, our guest speaker for today. The program is currently directed by Idris Sulaimani. And since Ghada retired from SDSU, we've continued to develop the program. We now have a certificate in Arabic and are working on the minor. And this fall, we have over 200 students taking courses in Arabic, most of which are taught by our two outstanding lecturers, Ghassan Sakaria and Yunus El Chadari. At this point, I would like to hand the virtual mic over to my colleague, Rob Malouf, who will introduce our guest speaker for today.
So thank you. I'm very happy to be able to welcome Ghada back to our department. Dr. Ghada Osman earned degrees in Near Eastern Studies and Islamic Studies at UCLA, and then a PhD in Middle Eastern Studies at Harvard University. After that, she joined our faculty here at San Diego State in 2001, first as a lecturer and director of the new Arabic language program. She quickly rose through the ranks to be full professor and chair of our department. And after many years of that, she retired from academic life in 2015 and moved to her second career as a psychotherapist and a yoga therapist, entering private practice. And in that capacity, she's carried out, designed numerous training programs, both in person and now in the pandemic world, doing things in video online. And she's currently on the faculty as a counselor at Miracosta College. Over the course of her two careers, she's written 4 books and 15 articles on topics ranging from the history of ideas in the early Arabic-speaking world to the role of yoga in treating post-traumatic stress. Yes, and she joins us and will be speaking on the politics of Arabic in the United States, reflections of the 20th anniversary of 9/11.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that kind introduction, Rob. Thank you very much for inviting me, Greg, and the faculty of the Linguistics Department and the Department of Linguistics and Asian/Middle Eastern Languages. I remember always having to say the whole name, including the slash, when I was at SDSU. And thank you all so much for being here. It's really heartwarming to be here and see so many colleagues from so many different contexts, in addition to friends from so many different parts of the country and parts of the world. So thank you so much for being here and for joining me, and knowing, especially as Greg mentioned, the Zoom fatigue, in addition to the fact that, yeah, this is not in person, there isn't even free food to be an incentive for folks to be here. So thank you. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. So I'm gonna take us on a little journey about Arabic, and particularly focusing on certain aspects that have to do with the politics of Arabic in the United States. So kind of reflecting, this is an anniversary for the Linguistics Department, and I'm going to talk about many anniversaries. It also happens to be an anniversary for the Arabic program at SDSU, and then of course the Arabic program and the start of the Arabic program overlapped. The Arabic program started the week before 9/11, 2001. And on that particular note, I'm going to start by sharing with you an anecdote. And it's an anecdote that dates back to when I was teaching elementary Arabic at SDSU. And I'll read you this anecdote like a story. "I'm excited to learn the numbers, ma'am," said the military officer taking my Arabic class. When I had taken classes in French, in German, in Spanish, and it had been time to learn the numbers, my classmates and I saw this as vocabulary we could use for everyday tasks like shopping or talking about family or friends. Knowing numbers was one more piece of the puzzle that enabled me as a language learner to build the bridges and connections of which most language learners dream. "Oh, really? Why is that?" I asked my student, inwardly cringing, I must add, at being called ma'am. "Because," the student explained with excitement, "I can now give coordinates for airstrikes correctly." And that encapsulates for me one anecdote, so much about the politics of Arabic and of Arabic teaching in the United States since 9/11 and over the past couple of decades. So as I mentioned, this is an intersection of anniversaries. The 50-year anniversary of the department, the 20-year anniversary of 9/11, the 20-year anniversary of the Arabic program at SDSU. I'm also going to talk about two other areas, and so wanted to point out their anniversaries too. The anniversary of social media, which actually is almost 20 years old for most of us who use it sort of in its current usage. So for example, MySpace, for those of you who may recall it, when you were friends with, if you had a MySpace account, were friends with Tom, for example, as your first friend, that was in 2004. Facebook, Twitter, 2006. And I'll be talking about this as I talk about the use of Arabic in certain contexts, hence my bringing it up now. And then here we are on Zoom due to a pandemic, the first case of which in China actually is estimated to have been around this date 2 years ago. So taking a look at our Arabic program on the eve of 9/11, fall 2001, the program started with 9 students in Arabic 101. 6 of them were 1.5 or second generation, so either students who had come from a country in which Arabic is the first language spoken at a young age, or students born in the US to parents from Arabic-speaking countries. There were 2 students in the class who were Muslim students wanting to learn Arabic in order to be able to read the Quran, so non-native speakers of Arabic but interested for religious reasons, and 1 undergraduate linguistic student. Fast forward to fall of 2002, and half the class after 9/11, half the class are ROTC students, so Reserve Officers Training Corps. So this is a program, offers the students a chance to study and then serve in the military after completing their degree, or even sometimes participating without necessarily fulfilling that commitment, but basically the ability to study with, in general, the knowledge that this will be connected with a military career. So typically, whether in terms of general student interest or in terms of how Arabic and Arabic programs are presented, there's been a motivation that I tend to refer to as a utilitarian motivation. And by that, I mean just simply that it's related to how useful this language will be in a very pragmatic, geopolitically oriented manner. So for example, in January of 2006, then President Bush introduced the National Security Language Initiative, which was aimed at increasing the number of Americans or students learning foreign languages, and especially what was termed critical need languages. And the first couple of years, it was specifically focusing in terms of study abroad on studying Arabic and studying Mandarin Chinese. And you have a little bit here about the funding for that in 2007, and this is just one program. So 114 million in 2007, 26.6 million in 2008 for K through 16. So all the way through into college. And schools were additionally awarded $750 million for critical languages. And this was part of the Department of State's Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs. So I'm going to share with you an example of 3 language programs, advertising or website, speak to advertise 3 language programs at a particular university as an example of how language programs tend to be discussed. So I use this example. I took this from a particular institution that's actually in the Northeast. There's a reference to New York, New Jersey metropolitan area, so somewhere that's not local, to talk about something that's a nationwide phenomenon in order for us to get a little bit of a sense of it. So those of you who are linguists may note some of the sort of the language features, I'll say more generally as I go through these. For folks who are not linguists, I'm just going to ask you to notice the impact on you as you read this, just what your sense is when you see these three examples. So the first one is about French. So this university's program in French, first of all, has specializations in teaching, translation, and civilization. So this is from their website, and you can click on each of these and get more information. Talks about the faculty's deep commitment, talks about graduate studies in French. And moving on to the next paragraph, talks about how majors and minors enjoy the many cultural and academic activities in French on campus, as well as in the local area. Final paragraph, the last sentence that I've highlighted, most of all, that in these 4 years, it's 4 years of indulging in the pleasures of speaking, reading, and thinking about all that is French. So indulging, right? I mean, I hear indulgence, I think chocolate, right? So indulging, right? Positive, we think of that, French, okay. Same university, Chinese. So this is another language that I'd mentioned in the critical area, that the first study abroad programs were related especially to Arabic and Chinese, so comparing Chinese. And I know there are many factors that go into what it is that's written, who writes it, how priorities are determined, etc. in the writing. I'm very aware of that, and that I'm presenting something that's pretty broad nonetheless. So in talking about Chinese, we have here how the Chinese language minor at this particular institution can complement any of the majors of the university. And then what I've highlighted at the end, the Chinese program organizes a variety of fun and exciting extracurricular activities, class trips to Chinese restaurants, Chinatown in New York City, Chinese calligraphy, painting workshops, Tai Chi workshops, film screenings, karaoke singing, and more. Lovely. Okay. Now we have Arabic. And so there are actually 2 screens for this, so it's a longer description. So the first paragraph, and you can read on your own time if you wish as I'm talking, and I'll highlight just some areas, right? So we're talking about how frequently spoken Arabic is, how, more generally spoken, how it's useful for writing, the number of speakers, the history of Arabic, and pre-Islamic poetry, Islam's golden age in Spain. There is a sentence I wanted to alert you to, which again, there are many, many factors that would be connected to this that I'm not going to go into, but nonetheless wanted to name. In the second paragraph where it says, it would be safe to assume that the Arabic-speaking world has a rich cultural heritage that can open many opportunities for anyone ready to delve into its richness and magnificence. So, it's an interesting phrase, right? It can be safe to assume. But now here's the next part. So Arabic is one of the most sought after languages in the United States, and now we have the description. It's a critical language by the US State Department. Arabic speakers are therefore in high demand. This is important for international affairs, etc., etc. Even in talking about field trips, the last part here, program includes field trips and hands-on activities that help students immerse themselves in the culture and practice the language with native speakers. Additionally, the Arab Student Association organizes weekly activities that expose students to Arabic language, and culture. So again, if you are a linguist, there's a lot to look at here. If you are not a linguist or not a person necessarily, looking at these 3 entries from a particular lens, just again, noticing the impact it has on you. This is not indulgence, right? This is geostrategic needs. And why this may be significant. So here is an example, or one reason. Here is an example from an article that was written about Arabic as a critical need for a language. So students were asked, whether they agree, aren't sure, or disagree. Learning Arabic as a foreign language is important to me because I like the language or culture, speaking of indulgence. Students who are US born, 20.3% of the samples, this is 108 students total. So 20.3% of the sample, 22 students said, yeah, it's important to me because I like the language and culture. 50 of them, 46.2%, said they disagree. So what does that mean? It either means that it's important to them not because they like the language and culture. Most generous interpretation is that this is not a primary reason for them. That's why it's not important. Maybe it's a secondary or tertiary reason. Nonetheless, striking, these are folks taking Arabic, right? And notice the difference between that and between international students whose countries of origin were not highlighted in this study, where 52.9% said that this was important because they like the language and culture, whereas 20.7% disagreed with that statement. And then I also would like to draw your attention to the not sure category. So not sure whether it's important to me because I like the language and culture or not, right? Also to me, striking. Ultimately, talking about speakers of Arabic, people from Arabic-speaking countries over the last 20 years, has brought forward expertise on Arabic speakers who are frequently conflated with Muslims, even though, of course, these are different categories, right, in terms of percentage of Muslims who are Arab, percentage of Arabic speakers who are Muslim. These are not by any means 100% correlation, quite the contrary. So yeah, here are some quotes that actually in the field of psychology, those studying violence will attribute. So these are experts in the area that are called on. So Muslim families, a cauldron for aggression. Many Arab families, the father is seen as an object of repressed hatred, becomes a source of violence, hedonistic fathers, etc., etc. I'm giving you an example from one psychoanalyst. This is the description, her description of herself and her expertise when it comes to who might carry out acts of violence. But what I would like to draw your attention to especially is the generalization at the bottom. So in Arab Muslim culture, you must willfully spill blood in order to cleanse male honor. A little bit above here, they have a rage that exceeds murder itself. So we may look at this and say, well, this is very far out there. This is not what someone studying Arabic believes, but this is there. And our interaction, my argument here is that our interaction with the Arabic language in the last 20 years has been one that has been very much related, right, to political interests, US political interests, and as a result has created this distance. And maybe now we can be in a different place. In what way does it create that distance? And in what way is then the utilitarian argument part of that continuum, right? So we know that we're not talking about some of the quotes that I just shared with you that I assume all of us here looking at say these are terrible generalizations that are actually macroaggressions, potentially hate speech, etc. However, is arguing about geopolitical interests as the main way to attract students to a language part of that continuum? I would argue yes. And I'm arguing that based on also, or I say that that informs some of the discussions that happen when we're teaching Arabic and having been in that field. And I also would say this at a time, and I'll share with you the numbers in a moment, but at a time when Arabic classes and the enrollments in Arabic classes in general have gone down because of shifts in the US political landscape. And the SDSU program is an exception. And so therefore is an opportunity to demonstrate how this is different. In the field of Arabic language and teaching, one of the biggest debates for those of you who may be unfamiliar with it is the question of which Arabic to teach. So to go over this quickly for those who aren't familiar with this particular phenomenon in Arabic, Arabic has something that's referred to as diglossia, and I'll talk about this in a little bit more detail in a moment. But what it basically means is that there is a difference between the written language, modern standard Arabic, what's referred to as modern standard Arabic, Fusha, and the different spoken variations in different Arabic speaking countries. So there are a lot of discussions about, well, which do we teach? Do we teach students the written form and then teach them oral conversation skills using that? Or do we teach one of the colloquials? Very, very common discussion that has been going on for decades and decades. And the focus on a discussion like that recently has also been about, well, what fits our strategic interests better? So I'm urging us for all of us in these fields thinking about this, that as strategic priorities shift, including a decrease in funding for critical language scholarships, as anti-Muslim, anti-Arab rhetoric has in some instances, and that should say been replaced or absorbed into other arguments. I won't go into that in a lot of detail, but suffice to say that research about this, for example, from the Southern Poverty Law Center, in addition to talking about anti-Muslim hate groups, also has talked about how a lot of the rhetoric has been absorbed into, especially in the last couple of years, and hence my one reason that I'm mentioning the pandemic, political circumstances, responses to the pandemic, and what has emerged as a result of that, vaccines, et cetera, that some of that rhetoric has been shifted and has been absorbed into these areas. And then as enrollments in Arabic classes decrease nationwide, so for example, this is from the Modern Language Association language enrollment database. So you can see way back when, pre 9/11, in fall of 1995, this is nationwide based on just which schools have reported. So granted, it doesn't end up being full data, but it's full data comparatively. In other words, it's enrollment in the same or more universities. So if anything, it's an underestimate. So fall 1995, we have this 4,000, 4,444. Fall of 98, we have a little bit of an increase. Fall of 2002, so now here's our first big jump right after 9/11. A doubling in numbers, which actually is very similar to the case at SDSU. Fall of 2006, a big jump, 2009, but now here's the decline. 2013, 2016. The last survey for this, the data actually is being gathered in fall 2021 and will be published the estimate at least is that the expectation is it'll be published in 2023. So after 2 decades of teaching Arabic with a focus on strategic reasons, could we now think of learning Arabic as indulging in the pleasures of speaking, reading, and thinking about all that is Arabic? So I'm going to return to the diglossia conversation a little bit, but I'm going to talk about it not so much as the static element of do we teach this or do we teach this, but rather I'm giving it as an illustration of some of the dynamic debates that may exist within Arabic-speaking communities. That maybe these are directions potentially that we go in, not these directions in particular, but just thinking in terms of these are dynamic communities, right? Like any other community. What are some of the discussions that would be circling in them around the politics of Arabic? So as I mentioned, diglossia involves two forms of a language. So in some contexts, one is referred to as a high form, one is referred to as a low form. So the written language, Fusha, the root of which in Arabic relates to purity, to eloquence, versus a spoken language that in the case of Arabic varies very significantly from country to country and from region to region, and is referred to by a number of terms, one of them being Ammiya. So Ammiya, is like sort of the general, the popular of the masses. So notice already, right, in the naming, the difference, the purity, the eloquence versus something of the masses. In Arabic in particular, there is a strong connection between Fusha, the written language, what's referred to as modern standard Arabic, the religion of Islam, and especially its holy book, the Quran, but also the definition of Arabness. So this is something that is not tied only to being Muslim. On the contrary, this is something that's very connected to Arab identity. So in the words of the Arabist Kristen Brustad, a quote from her that I think is helpful here is standard language ideology. So this is referring to the written form, idealizes Fusha beyond just being correct to like a moral stature. So that actually not speaking Fusha, not being able to be conversant in Fusha is like a moral failing. So hence the arguments, well, do we teach students to write and teach them to speak eloquently, which is the implication by teaching spoken Fusha or Fusha as in the oral context, or do we teach them how to speak in the way that native speakers speak? However, when we look at, again, coursework, same database, MLA, so I know for a fact that fall of 2009 and going further back, it's not like there were zero students taking Egyptian Arabic. So this is definitely an underreport. I know that there were universities teaching it, etc. Egyptian Arabic in general has been the variety of spoken Arabic most frequently taught up until 9/11 because of the role of the media in Egypt, the fact that Egyptian movies are generally, have a popularity across the Arabic-speaking world. And so until 9/11, Egyptian Arabic was very much the spoken language taught, which this does not really reflect at all. But we see in fall 2013, 158, and then fall 2016, 188. So we see a little bit of an increase as then our next category of Iraqi Arabic, which I will say the database again shows 0 before 2002. And certainly anecdotally, as someone who was in college in the early 90s, the idea of having a course in Iraqi Arabic was just something that was very, very unusual. Right? So, however, fall 2009, because of, again, political interests, geostrategic interests, we have 61 students and then an increase in 2013. And look at that drop in 2016. Right? So talk about where the priorities lie. Levantine Arabic. So this is the variety of Arabic spoken in countries of West Asia, so Syria, that are referred to as the Levant. So Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, and then Palestinian Arabic. These numbers again tell a story, right? So 2009, no programs. Fall 2013, after the events of 2011 that started out as being called the Arab Spring, with political shifts, revolutions, etc., and then start the beginning of the humanitarian crisis in Syria. Now we see an increase in the number of students, and then now again a decrease. However, again, this is a dynamic discussion among Arabic-speaking communities. So I'm sharing with you, for example, a study that was carried out in Cairo, Egypt, and Rabat, Morocco, about writing in varieties of Arabic that we think of as spoken. So, question 2, people interviewed was, do you agree that Ammiya, so that's the term that I introduced before, that means, that refers to the spoken language, or Darja, which is another term for that, used more frequently in Morocco, etc., in the areas of the Maghreb, Northwest Africa. So does that have a place as a written language? In Cairo, 57% of respondents said yes, it does. That yes, we may say this is a spoken language, but in fact, this is something that you should be able to write in. 20% disagree. Rabat, slightly different. So 32% said no, said yes, it could be. 58% said no. Again, dynamic, political, in terms of what these signify, what they stand for. Focus on Cairo. So individuals with an elementary school education in Cairo said 12% of them said that they wrote daily in Fusha, in standard Arabic, in the what seemed to be the appropriate written form. 26% of them said that they wrote frequently in the spoken language. Individuals with a college education, 30% said that they write daily in Fusha, and 42% said that they write daily in Ammiya, in the spoken version. So education impacts how much writing somebody does, but not really necessarily what kind of writing somebody does, what someone uses, the language that seemed to be appropriate for writing or the one that seemed to be appropriate for speaking. And we have various ways of this. I'm just going to share with you 2 examples again to see some, kind of talk a little bit about some of the dynamic exchanges that have political elements attached to them within the communities. So on social media, this is actually like from my Facebook account. So folks, I know. So the meme on the top right that those of you who are on social media may have seen anyway, cats, when you pet them for too long, right? They're like, stop, don't do it. All right, so that's the original meme. The responses here, so someone says, ha ha ha, so accurate. And then here we have the Franco, right? So القطة اللي عندي لما بنطول بتعضنا. So the cat, that I have, when we spend too much time petting it, basically, when we take too long, it bites us. And then look at the next one. Same here, والله. وأصلا أنا عندي في ساعات rejection مش مفهوم. Okay? So same here. Wallahi is like an emphatic, literally means by God, but it emphasizes, right, what somebody said. And sort of originally, but really anyway, Anna, which means I, which I notice capitalized, which I also think is something noteworthy, right? So I is capitalized in English and Anna is capitalized here. Andi, I have sometimes rejection. Mish mafhum, which is not understandable. So it's like cat sometimes, rejects me, turns away for reasons I can't figure out. So yeah, noticing all of this and how much of these experiences do our students get to access. And by our, I don't mean our program, I mean, or at SDSU, I mean generally studying Arabic the way that the study of Arabic has been in the past 20 years with its priorities. I'm going to share with you another campaign, and again with a lot of layering in it. This was a Twitter campaign in celebration of International Arabic Language Day in 2014. It was launched by a representative for Samsung Levant. And the launch invited people to participate in a campaign of writing in Arabic on social media in celebration of this day. So the hashtag is I write in Arabic, but the hashtag is not standard written Arabic. The hashtag includes an element of spoken Arabic. So if this were standard Arabic, it would be aktub, I write. Instead, it's bektib, which is a colloquial form with the hashtag. So it's signaling this choice of register, which again, this Arabist Kristen Brewstead says maybe it's to take off pressure in writing in Fusha by then sort of keying the context with colloquia. So it's I am Arab. On the right-hand side, you have various Arabic letters in this graphic. And then the phrase in Arabic says, I am Arab and hashtag I write in Arabic, but with this incorporated. All sorts of responses to this. Some people writing in standard Arabic, some people writing in colloquial, some people commenting on the fact that it incorporated this form, some people saying that it should not have incorporated it, but again, dynamic arguments here. So from here, I'm going to shift a little bit to tell you, just to give a little bit of background about the history of this. Then in fact, historically, actually, there is this history of literary production using the spoken form. And in general, that what's happened is that written texts, if they use the spoken form, according to two researchers in particular, Emerita Ghada Osman and Humphrey Davis, that these texts were basically seen to be incorrect, excluded from publishing, brushed off, etc. Again, food for thought information. I'm going to shift gears to talk about another debate that has to do with the politics of identity. It's a very different kind of debate, but again, looking at debates and discussions about these communities, that actually this one in particular I selected because it has a very local component, and especially local in the location of SDSU. So in order to have the context for this, so this relates directly to the pandemic, but in order to have the context for this, it's important to know a little bit about census and categorizations when it comes to race and folks from Arabic-speaking countries. So the definition of a person who is white is a person having origins in any of the original peoples of Europe, the Middle East, or North Africa. So this is actually relevant when it comes to data that's related to sort of at a federal level, in addition to at a state level. 2018, there was a big discussion around the census and potentially adding a category that was Middle Eastern or North African. And that's because since 9/11, folks of that background have used this term that I have at the bottom, that they're white without privilege. So with, especially immediately after 9/11, the years after 9/11, the rise in attacks, but even not even the macroaggression level, just the microaggression level, othering, etc., that it's like, you know, people in the community, in that community are basically saying, when you say white, you don't really mean us, right? So white without privilege, hence that label. Discussion during the, before the 2020 census about this being a category, and in the end, what happened with the 2020 census was that people who identify as white were asked to expand on their ethnic origins. And there were examples on the form, so you can say you're German, you're Irish, you're English, you're Italian, you're Lebanese, you're Egyptian, etc. There are reasons for the history of this that you can probably envision, even if it's unfamiliar to you, that being white obviously holds privilege, but held enormous privilege historically, and beyond privilege, right, was less dangerous in many ways. And so anyone who could fit into that, especially when it came to then being able to have citizenship, et cetera, would do that. And hence that generalization. But now being here at this juncture, this was the debate. What that means when it's come to the pandemic. So this is a quote from, or an excerpt from an article about this situation. So I'm not going to read through all of it, but just to give you the sense. And again, if you're someone who would prefer reading rather than listening to my summary, then having the options to do that, or the option to do that. But basically what is happening here is that this critical care physician at Sharp Grossmont, so for those of you not in the San Diego area, that is very close to San Diego State University. So that's like a 10-minute drive from San Diego State University from SDSU, so very close by. Noticed a disproportionate number of Arab Americans coming through ICU, and checked with other colleagues and noticed the same thing, that there is this disproportionate number. But because of the census data, there is no way to identify the impact of COVID on Arab American communities, so on communities who, many of whom are native speakers of Arabic. And what he noticed was of those admitted to Sharp Grossmont with COVID-19 related conditions, 11% were Arab American, which is about twice the rate of admissions he typically saw for that population. And just to give you an idea of the numbers, so again, for those who are not in the San Diego area, La Mesa is close to an area in San Diego, El Cajon, which is known to have a large, especially Chaldean population, as well as Kurdish population. So populations originally from Iraq. The populations that are minority populations in Iraq. However, at the highest estimate, the population, the Chaldean population in El Cajon is 8.7%, and the Arab American population in El Cajon, highest estimate, 9.8%. So this physician said, well, yeah, nobody is noticing the impact of COVID-19 in the community. The second part of the quote is a powerful one, and I think is one that is representative of what many in Arabic-speaking communities would say. That when it comes to Arab Americans as an ethnic minority, they're always visible when it's bad news, but when it's their health, they're invisible. So we have some numbers here, remarkably high numbers. 15% of COVID-19 patients classified as white were actually Arab American. 30 to 35% of COVID-19 patients in the ICU classified as white were Arab American. Right, so admitted to hospital in general versus in the ICU. And like with many communities impacted by COVID, in general, in this particular case, these were patients who were socioeconomically underprivileged, had less access to insurance, right? So had to waited longer until their symptoms became more severe before they then go to the hospital. The reasons that Arab Americans, in general, may have been impacted disproportionately in this way due to COVID-19, as I mentioned, some of this is related to the experience of other historically excluded communities, exposure to stigma, and then in these cases, xenophobia, as well as some health conditions, multi-generational homes, right? A lot of folks living together, lack of social support for new immigrants, et cetera, et cetera. There are also other arguments related to this that I'm not going to get into now, but that make this the situation of this community also particularly noteworthy when it comes to COVID and comes to vaccines, et cetera. So vaccine hesitancy, et cetera. So talked about two different areas where there's kind of a dynamic discussions. Talked about some of the history of the politics of Arabic teaching, of even Arabic learning. And I've hinted at my hope for the future as exemplified by SDSU and the fact that SDSU's Arabic program remains strong in terms of enrollment in the face of these changing geopolitical priorities. That, yeah, can the goal of the coming decades of Arabic learning be to connect with the language, with its speakers, with the cultures and civilizations affiliated with it, and the debates within it, within its communities for their own sakes, rather than for the sake of our own geopolitical interests? And can we relate to it in this particular manner and basically be studying it and studying Arabic speakers for their own sake? Thank you.
Thank you, Ghada, for that highly interesting talk with lots of discussion that we can have next. So one way we can do this is raising hands for questions, but I know people can also put their questions in the chat. Aniko and I are going to kind of monitor questions. Maybe we'll probably start with all of the raised hands first, and then maybe at the end we can go to the chat. Might be a cleaner way instead of trying to go back and forth and so forth. Van Levy has a question. No, oh, okay. Oh, I'm sorry, a new one popped in. Eniko, let's see. The article you quoted on student perception as to why they learned Arabic was published in 2007. Would carrying out a similar or the same questionnaire today yield different results?
That would be my hope. My hope would be that it would yield different results. And yeah, I would be very, very curious. There's another piece about that study that I didn't mention, so as not to go down too many rabbit holes. But actually that particular study was one that was carried out at historically Black colleges and universities. And anecdotally, students at historically Black colleges and universities in general have been more sympathetic towards Arabic learning for, sort of affinity reasons, various affinity reasons. And so that's even more telling to me. Yeah, that one of the things that's also striking in terms of research and research for motivation is that research on motivation to learn Arabic really seems to have reached a peak around 2009, 2010, and then now in this last decade has tapered off more. And that also says something. And part of that was around funding for it and funding related to grants that institutions received. And it would be very interesting to know more.
Let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it. All for
Right?
it.
And I have a question for you. So you've asked the key question here, can we make the learning of Arabic about the kinds of things we might say about French and Chinese and other languages, about learning about the culture and learning about the people of the culture and the social issues and problems they're having, and not make it about geopolitical concerns? And I would like to think the answer is yes. And your idea, how would we go about doing this when we still have, there's government grants for people to study Arabic? I know there's still an interest in the military taking courses in Arabic. And are those always going to be like Arabic for their purpose, and then there's Arabic for another purpose? Or should all teaching of Arabic, regardless of the population, kind of take all of this into consideration? And how do we go about doing it?
Yeah, I think, teaching language for special purposes, right, is a large part of this discussion. That what are the purposes that we identify as important ones and promote as important ones? So we know, for example, that yeah, business, that's a language context, X for a special purpose, but the business is one such context. When do we tend to prioritize that and when do we not? The other element that I would say about this is learning languages with an emphasis or a focus on a narrower area is a higher level task. And instead, when it comes to, for example, the military purposes, we treat it like it's introductory. That first you're going to do this, and then maybe from there you'll expand more. And that's something that we actually see across the board in expansion in Arabic courses nationwide. And yeah, maybe reconsidering that and how we treat that compared to coursework in other languages. I think another piece to this, though, is what we choose to include even in those special purpose categories. So if we're talking about military purpose, what is that purpose? Is the purpose only according to, similar to what my student wanted to learn, or that, these are coordinates for airstrikes? Or are these also numbers that are helpful when someone is having a conversation that are outside of that? And so I think there's also that expansion. So I would say it's at several different levels. I think a large part of this is for us to also examine our role almost as ambassadors when it comes to this particular subject matter and other subject matter this would be related to.
Yeah, thank you, Ghada. Fareed.
Hi, this question may be a little too raw. So if it is, of course, you'll choose what you answer from it or not. But I'm wondering if you'd reflect a little bit on the emotional toll it takes on someone to teach Arabic in the United States in the last 20 years. If they care about Arabic-speaking peoples in the way that you do.
I appreciate the rawness of the question. And I think the question is a similar one to any sort of context in which there is a certain amount of emotional labor in a way that's a little bit different from how we tend to think of emotional labor, right? So we tend to think of emotional labor as the burden of having to teach about subject matter to which one is somehow related. This has an additional element that it's teaching about subject matter to which one is related in a way that is supposed to entice someone else to think it's important for reasons that have to do with their own geostrategic priorities or geostrategic priorities that they're connecting to, and that ultimately have at their core war. And that is a big toll. And I will say on a personal level, that's definitely something that was a big toll for me. I would be curious from other colleagues if, how that has impacted them. I think one of the things that has occurred among instructors of Arabic, and I think especially because there was a hire of instructors of Arabic that was very, very quick. And, we have this many students, let's bring someone else to teach them. And not, someone, additional folks to teach them, and not necessarily a lot of reflection on how programs are being developed, right? So nationwide, it was a scramble. We have students, having high numbers of students is great. We want to keep that going and so here's somebody and let's go, rather than, okay, let's think about how we're developing this. And I think that scramble and that sense of urgency, that ultimately this is a sense of urgency that's responding to a geopolitical need, also takes its own toll. Thank you. So I'm seeing some questions in the chat, and I don't know if I should go ahead and take them or if
I think
Aniko and Greg, you would rather moderate them. I'm happy either way, just to get clarity.
I just want to point out that Matt Schultz's hand was up before
yeah,
other questions
absolutely.
came in.
My
So-
apologies
I
for
will-
missing that.
Then I will leave the order of events to the two of you. Thank you.
Hi, Ghada. Thank you very much. This was a very insightful talk. I've been accompanying Arabic courses at SDSU Log for the last 4.5 years, and I find it difficult to formulate the question as such. So it's more of a comment. The one thing that has encouraged me with these intensive language training courses that we do for US military at LARC, I've seen a shift to in contents of these courses towards what I would call cultural components, raising of cultural awareness, sometimes at a relatively low level of kind of greeting and food, but sometimes also going well beyond that, because many of the course participants we have are highly proficient in Arabic in this case, or in the various dialects of Arabic that we do teach in our training courses. And I find that very encouraging. There seems to be, it's about genuine rapport building. It's not about finding a target and being able to identify it in Arabic or something like that. These are young people, and sometimes they have very little awareness of what's going on in any other country but their own, basically. And them being almost subjected, exposed to first language speakers, and most of our instructors are, is already a unique cultural experience for them. If that then is accompanied by what I would call useful, very often it's called authentic, teaching materials, then I think with many of them we're getting somewhere. I think Siri is trying to talk to me, sorry.
I was wondering what was
Just a
going on.
comment. I'm kind of unable
Yeah,
to formulate that as a question.
I appreciate that. And I'm actually going to go ahead and stop my share before I respond so that I can see everybody. So, okay. Yeah, I appreciate that. And I appreciate your tracking, especially the development of the content of the courses and what they entail. I feel like this is, I believe this is a process, right? So I think there are a few things that stand out to me that kind of, grab my attention in this. And again, this is not about the courses offered, or although I think, coursework is an area, right, where we can control the content. That's much easier than controlling our cultural paradigms nationwide. Nonetheless, there are pieces to this that are not only about the culture, about the courses. So for example, I appreciate actually a bridge back to Farid's question about the emotional toll, right? That in Arabic courses, a lot of the time, the interaction with the instructor is in itself a new experience. And there are a lot of benefits to that. And at the same time, that's encapsulates something, right? So if I am teaching a course and a student gets to interact with me and now has had their first interaction with a speaker of Arabic, and that changes the perception, that says something already about the nature of the situation nationwide, right? That is not the same as in other languages. And I would argue it's not just that it's not the same between lictals and non-lictals, so less commonly taught languages versus languages that are more commonly taught, but that there is a differentiation even within the subject matter and with the generalizations and stereotyping that might be related to Arabic. So perceptions that are around, I'll give one huge generalization, and nonetheless, I think we can relate to the elements of it. So within Arabic speaking communities, generalizations, stereotyping, etc., around some sort of equation between males and violence or between females and oppression, those are paradigms that are out there, right? And so in that interaction, a student gets to dismantle that. But that tells us something, that the interaction needs to happen for that to be dismantled, right? The content even that's about genuine connection. There is a difference in connection based on context. So if I need, and again, I'm not saying this is the case with your student, but just putting thoughts out there kind of for us to think about. If I'm trying to make a connection, even if I really want genuine connection, but I have other interests in mind, that's different from a connection because, for example, I really want to connect to this culture and want to study there, etc., want to be immersed. Am I suggesting by any means that students only have strategic interest? No, not at all. But again, kind of noticing, I guess I'm drawing our attention to some of the nuances and complexities within that trajectory, within that history, as we notice that things have changed, and inviting us to notice even those nuances even more and work even more to create some of those shifts.
Thank you. Can I briefly add two
Please,
things?
yeah.
I very much agree. One, we've even got data to what you're saying from the student evaluations, basically. Some of our participants, students say, yes, I would study Arabic even so it were not part of my job.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of almost 50-50. I can't kind of make any claims about the numbers. There is another group who said, nah, I'm only doing this, it's my job. They told me to do it. And I, quite frankly, I couldn't care less. The moment I can stop this, I will. I get, and that's the second thing to add, I get similar feedback in German courses. I teach German. I'm originally from East Germany. I get similar handling of stereotyping, cliches, political innuendo. Yes, it does. It take, to Farid's question, does it take an emotional toll sometimes? Yes, it does over the years. I guess as educators, this is, it's one thing I am prepared to do because I think it's for a good purpose, basically, in some way. Even it might hurt me once in a while.
I agree that it's important and that it's for a good purpose. Absolutely. I think there are the point in time makes a difference, right? So even 2021 compared to 2002, 2003, 2004, right? And I think that applies to Arabic. That's going to apply to German, looking at different decades, right? And where post-World War II, for example, immediately post-World War II, right? Moving on, that's a big difference. And ultimately, part of my job has different elements to it, right? So people take German, for example, and absolutely, is there a military connection? Yes, yes. And part of my job can mean many different things, right? And that's also a part of this, that what are the assumptions behind how this may benefit me? Whether it's immediately part of my job, what my job is, but then also if I'm not taking it because it's part of my job, and I would be taking it anyway, what intentions do I have? Is it that I think it could help me down the road? So, for instance, I used to, for a long time, read applications for critical language scholarships. And interestingly, those used to come with, they'd have a modest honorarium, and this year they do not have an honorarium, which I think says something again about priorities and shifts in priorities. And many applicants, I would actually say the majority who are taking elementary Arabic, were taking it not because they had a professional connection then, but because they anticipated that they would. And so they would argue for the fact that I'm sure this will help me because somehow I'm going to be able to work for some entity that privileges these geopolitical priorities, right? And so, yeah, I think, again, it's like there are different layers to this. And at the same time, I hear your overarching point about the shifts. I appreciate that.
I think Camille has a question, Greg, in the chat box saying, I wonder how Arabic teaching might be shaped or approached so as to bear in mind the influence of social media on younger generations of Arabic speakers.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting discussion. So one of the things that these studies that look into which Arabic and what Arabic will be written and how it will be written are in part, they're presented as rogue study or studies of rogue concepts, but actually they're studies of preservation. Because one of the things that happens, and I think the study from Cairo that looked at the percentage of college-educated respondents that who wrote in Arabic, whether written form or spoken form, and actually it's below 50% across the board, right? Nothing is above 50% in that particular study in Cairo. It's because most of these respondents actually went to school where they were trained to write in English. Mm-hmm. So these are preservation arguments that this is a way to preserve writing in Arabic and maybe using then also Arabic alphabet rather than Franco and the the Latin alphabet options. So yeah, I think these are very rich discussions. I think they also are, like anything that is happening outside of something that we study, that the people carrying them out are doing this regardless. And so it's a phenomenon that's in place. And it's a phenomenon that when it comes to language teaching, we either catch up with, or the gulf, the gap between what we teach and what students actually encounter in the real world gets larger and larger beyond just that discussion of diglossia that already was such a big discussion in the teaching of Arabic.
Aniko, did you have the next question?
I think, sorry to interrupt, Kate, and good to see you. I think there was a question in the chat from Ann Johns that may have come just to me.
Oh, okay.
If I could just scroll, because it was a while back.
Okay, let's answer that, and then
you.
Catherine is next.
Yes. So Anne's question was about the most useful dialect, or is the question unanswerable? Yeah, I think the question depends on what the goal of the student is. That's one way of answering the question. There's a different way of answering the question that has to do with perceived, at least, closeness to modern standard Arabic. So one of the arguments that's frequently made is the idea is the one where teaching Levantine Arabic in particular is helpful because it's close to, or perceived to be closer in certain ways to modern standard Arabic. That's a helpful priority if the priority is modern standard Arabic and the priority is therefore, in general, improving proficiency in reading, writing, speaking, listening. However, if that is not the case, and especially, so I will say anecdotally, one of the ironies that happens in teaching Arabic is that our non-native speaker students often end up having a stronger command of Fusha, of modern standard Arabic, than native speakers of Arabic, which then can create its own gulf. I have an anecdote related to this. I'll try to say it quickly, and it's going to be one of those that's a little bit lost in translation. So when I was taking Arabic, I had a colleague that was studying Arabic and went to Cairo and was very excited to be practicing his Arabic and standing on a street corner. And a cab went by and said, "Hey, do you need a ride?" And my colleague responded in perfect modern standard Arabic and said, "No, no, no, I'm waiting for someone," with all the appropriate case endings that modern standard Arabic has that colloquial does not, and with all the lexical items, with all the words that modern standard Arabic has. And the taxi driver said, "Who are you waiting for?" Saladin, who is a 12th century figure, right? So, it's you're from another era. What is this, right? So the disconnect in that particular anecdote, I just think is very, very telling. So, and yeah, for those of you who are Arabic speakers, I can't resist saying it in Arabic because of the sarcasm of the intonation. So cab driver says, "Mean Salah ad-Din." So, Kate, thank you for waiting.
Thank you for the fascinating talk. It's wonderful to see you.
Wonderful to see you too.
A comment and then a question. I was really struck within the context of your talk by the numbers that Greg was giving us at the very beginning. The 345 students studying Japanese right now, 208 studying Arabic, and then 94 studying Chinese. And what that made me think about was Japanese would be the least strategic, I think, right? It wouldn't, the students aren't doing it for strategic reasons. They're doing it because they love anime and popular culture. At least that's why I teach Asians to take my classes in it. So then that made me wonder, it's something I struggle with doing China as well. Students always take Japan instead of China. They take what they see as fun instead of really what they see as strategic, at least to some extent. And so I wondered, I wondered how, as Arabic language instructors, how can one get beyond convince them of the pleasures and the indulgence of Arabic that they see with Japanese, but don't see maybe with Arabic or Chinese. And then secondly, I was really fascinated by your call to include these debates within the Arabic speaking communities in how Arabic is taught. I thought that was wonderful. And I wondered if you could perhaps give us an example of how that would look in a classroom. Like, how do you bring those debates to life when you're teaching the language? So either of those, you don't have to address both.
Yeah. So there's kind of a brief answer and then a longer answer. And I think the brief answer has to do with ultimately trusting that these debates are worthy debates, even for students who may not be taking Arabic, thinking that these are the debates they'll be studying, right? And that kind of connects to a bigger question that I think at the college and university level we're very aware of, and in many other contexts, but I'm just mentioning it here since this is where we are right now, about how much are we teaching are we focusing on learning for learning's sake, and how much are we focusing on objectives with an eye to something else, right? And that's a much bigger debate, and this is a piece of that. I think ultimately, in terms of incorporating some of these debates, the reason that I selected one of the ones that I selected has to do with the diglossia issue, is because what happens with the teaching of Arabic also is in that gap of diglossia, the access to authentic materials that might then engage students in this way. So you gave the example of anime, then becomes a door that's closed, or at least very partially open, that I can find, for example, as an instructor, one can find songs by particular singers who tend to sing more in the register of modern standard Arabic, but that in itself, for your average native speaker, they can refer to that as something that sounds learned, that, so I'm thinking of one particular Iraqi singer, right, where people say, oh, I love hearing his Arabic, it's so eloquent, so perfect, because the modern standard Arabic, and that he sings in that. I've heard people say he's helped native speakers of Arabic, he's helped me improve my modern standard Arabic. That's a different relationship from something that is actually appealing, right? Appealing in a way that's not about that aspect of appeal. And that, I think, is something that then comes with a whole paradigm shift, so that we're not trying to create new methods that make Arabic appealing in these ways, over slapping them over a structure that still prioritizes other aspects, and especially the geopolitical ones. I know I've only answered an aspect of your question, but yeah, I think ultimately it comes with, as wishy-washy as it may sound, it comes with what may feel like a leap of faith, but it's troubling that it's a leap of faith, that this is subject matter that's interesting and engaging for its own sake, and that these are populations with whom engagement is actually worthwhile for its own sake.
Iniko, did you have the next question?
I could actually raise my hand. This is something I learned during this. That's great. I thought I couldn't as a host, but anyway. So my late mother used to tell me in her, late years, who was an English teacher, and she started learning English herself in her early years because she loved the language and she loved the culture. And so she told me in her later years that I'm so disappointed because people just simply don't learn the language for the love of the culture and the love of the language anymore, because they are very utilitarian. And I think you touched on that in a way. I mean, kind of maybe, multiple layers, but still. But I'm wondering, to what extent maybe the fact that Arabic is a Category 4 language, which is very different, or very, in terms of its script anyway, from the Latin alphabet, might influence people to learn Arabic, and through language, its culture. So would it be maybe a better approach to maybe teach the culture first in English, and then maybe entice some people into learning the language as well? Or is it not necessarily that dissectable or separable, or anyway? So I'm just wondering to what extent the script and the fact that it's a different script might influence people taking the language courses rather than maybe culture courses that might provide them with a lot of incentives to maybe learn the language later.
Yeah, thank you, Aniko. So I'll answer this question first with a very personal connection to it, which is that as the person who initiated the Arabic culture class at SDSU,
Yes.
I agree absolutely, right? That I think, yes, the teaching that class and having a more possibility to explore in different ways, definitely, I think is very, very helpful. So Arabic is a Category 4 language, which for those who may be unfamiliar with that, what that means is that, yeah, that is the highest, most frequently discussed, at least in the most frequently discussed paradigm, kind of the highest category in terms of difficulty for native speakers of English to learn. So while, for example, French or Spanish is a Category 1, German is a Category 2, etc., so Arabic is a Category 4. Arabic is a Category 4 actually not because of its writing system. So its writing system is one where there is, to kind of speak about it in general, a correspondence, so using general terms, a correspondence between sound and letter. So 28 characters. Most of the time, and folks here on the screen that have taught Arabic 101 can corroborate that typically it's actually kind of the first half, let's say, of a semester when students are learning the alphabet. So part of I think The bridge is actually clarifying that particular piece. So Arabic is a category 4 for kind of a variety of other features that I won't go into. But yeah, even that piece of information, even the accessibility of that, right? And even just where, so for most students, and again, anecdotally, when I would ask students coming into Arabic culture what they knew of Arabic culture, and no concerns about what they're going to share, but what are some aspects they would know, it was usually the women are oppressed. So these are the two of the stereotypes I gave you earlier, right? The guys tend to be like real violent and real protective. And I love the food.
Okay.
My neighbor.
Okay.
So yeah, it's good. These things just all coexist, right? And we are complex beings and we bring together lots of ideas in our minds. So yeah, the third one, I love the food, is actually personal interaction, right? So the first two are not. The first two come from media, anecdotal reports, et cetera, et cetera. That third one, that's a personal connection. And these are the elements that ultimately we're building more. So I'm not suggesting that the answer to this is, in such set contexts, because I think that part of this has also, this experience been a challenge, but yeah, that it's like, what is it that builds bridges in ways that are beyond the popular messages that get sent?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, you'll be happy to know, Ghada, that the course you created is still wildly popular. It enrolls incredibly well. And that DRIS just recently got approved for CDI training. It's our Course Development Institute to offer the course online over the next couple of summers. So we're hoping that will attract a huge audience of people to take the course. And then hopefully that'll trickle back into more people enrolling in the language program. And Camille says here in the chat that Arabic culture class was fascinating, multidisciplinary, multinational, very rich. So thank you for bringing that to us.
Well, and yeah, thank you for your support of it. And thank you, Dries, for the development. That's very exciting.
So Ben Atik has her hand up. I wonder what question she might have.
Hi, Aniko. Nice to see you. Hi, Ghada. It's very nice
Hi,
to
Bon.
see you.
Good to see you too.
So going back to the culture, so being from Iraq, and I will say I am Chaldean, when people speak about culture, when they ask me about my culture, I'm like, okay, so what do you mean my culture? Because there's so many microcultures within the Arabic culture. So that's one of the things that I every time someone asks me about my culture, I said, well, do you mean like Arabic in general? Do you mean the Chaldean culture? Do you mean the Aramaic language? So that's one of the things that, not so much a question, it was just more of a comment that the culture is expansive. And there's a lot of mini cultures, I guess, if you want to call it that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate your raising that point, that we are talking about a large expanse of 20 plus countries, different groups within the countries, and also culture is not just about the country somebody is from, right? So ultimately there are so many aspects that go into what one's culture is. And ethnicity, race, national origin are only one piece. So gender, age, socioeconomic status, including age, including generation, right? So when we think in the US, the difference between somebody raised in the 1960s, the 1980s, and the 2000s, right? That expands, never mind all the other pieces related to that person's culture. So yeah, that is one of the challenges. And when we're talking about such a broad expanse, what are we really talking about? And can we make that also dynamic? And not making it dynamic only by saying, I'm going to tell you about this group here, and then I'm going to share with you this thing from this group here, but understanding that this is a dynamic process. And that's also part of that paradigm shift right? Rather than that I'm learning this because I'm going to learn to do this, but rather can I engage with this? I think one of the pieces kind of to my argument here today is that constant engagement. Can I come to understand that I've learned this and now I'm going to do this, and that there's that constant engagement and development of relationship. Thank you. I think there was another question in the chat.
Yes, Nagia.
From the person for whom it must now be 2:30 a.m. Cairo time. So thank you so much for staying with us and even answering a question, even asking a question, having the wherewithal and the alertness. Really appreciate it. So yeah, our diplomats and persons engaged in interfaith dialogue interested in learning Arabic. I think in terms of diplomats, I would say yes, absolutely. The sort of folks related to the State Department and who will get postings, etc. I think for us in San Diego, seeing our location, that's not a prime area, but Arabic programs in Washington, D.C., for example, that is definitely a very strong component. People engaged in interfaith dialogue, my experience, and this is purely anecdotal, I'm not aware of research around this, so I'm only answering this anecdotally. My sense is no. My sense is few and far between, maybe somebody who's interested in travel as part of interfaith dialogue. But yeah, anecdotally, I would say not so much. I think that idea too of Arabic being difficult, and again, I think that has to do that categorization in the category 4. I think there's a lot that plays into that that could be shifted if there are different priorities in terms of learning Arabic. But I think there's also just the perception, even for people who are not aware of the categories, that Arabic's going to be hard. And so based on that, I think either the motivation has to be just internally very intrinsic or has to have a very strong career component. And so in my experience, anecdotally, not so much. And that would be wonderful. I mean, I think if people learned languages, if people interested in interfaith dialogue learned languages related to other faiths, that would be very, very powerful. And clear connections that could be made out of that too. So clear linguistic connections across languages.
Any final
Thank
questions before we wrap up?
I just wanted to thank everybody for the comments on the chat too, that I have been, tracking those and appreciate them. I can't, don't have the opportunity to respond in writing.
Okay, well, thank you, Ghada, for such a wonderful talk. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, I want to open my microphone, and
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Good job.
We do have a quick transition here. Really quick, I'm going to try to share my screen. So, okay, there we go. We do want to give a special shout out to our wonderful coordinators in our department who helped us with all stages of planning this event. Cassie Neal, Darlene Baich, and Yasmin Panahi. And also thanks to Ali Sabri, who helped us in bringing to fruition the logo that we have for our 50th anniversary. Obviously, you can see we've spelled out anniversary phonetically. And the 0 of our 50 has the script and names of all of the languages in our department. And again, just a reminder that we keep your eye out for events that we'll be hosting in the spring. Pending the pandemic, we really hope those will be face-to-face, and we're planning for those. Thank you again, everyone, for your attendance. And again, special thanks to Ghada.
thank you,
Thanks,
Ghada.
everybody. Happy Thanksgiving and great to see you, Ghada.
Thank you so much. It's so wonderful to see so many dear, familiar faces. So thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you.
I'm seeing a lot of shukrans in the chat, including in Arabic script. So yeah, shukran from me, which is what I just wrote to all of you. And yeah, thank you so much for having me and for making the time to be here.
Ghada, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you, everyone.